Greetings, one, greetings, all. Welcome to another episode of Time of Reckoning. By now, I guess we all fully appreciate that we are indeed living in a time of reckoning. Some persons say that history is repeating itself. Others have their own views of how to express and explain the happenings of today's world. But one thing for sure is that a foundation were laid for the world in which we now find ourselves. And today, what we are seeing manifesting before our eyes are indeed a serious time of reckoning. The era that we now find ourselves in began some 2021 years ago. And this era is indeed one that many do not stop to think about and to get an understanding of. Out of this era came the most diverse religious world, for example. There are these great numbers of religions, all designed to lead mankind to heaven, as they say. And the confusion surrounding these world's religions certainly faces a time of reckoning. There are a few things finding ourselves now in the 21st century that people do not stop to think about what the first century was, what the third century was, what the fifth century was like, and so on and so forth. And so there is a tendency on the part of most people to think that life in the last century and the beginning of this one is what life always happens to be. For example, it is customary to see religious persons with a volume of 66 books in one collection called the Bible. And very few take the time to learn that that concept of having a 66 book volume is a relatively new phenomenon. There was a time when it was not so. In fact, not a single individual whose name is recorded in the Bible ever held a volume of 66 books in their hands. Never happened. Okay, it never existed then. You know? So there have always been a set of writings that people always have here and there that people would consult, people would read, people would refer to. For example, when Jesus walked the earth with his followers, he made reference to the book of Isaiah and he made reference to other books in the Bible. But never for once, Jesus nor his disciples held a volume in their hands, which is a collection of any number of books called a Bible. So we need to understand that when we today hold a 66 book volume in our hands and say this is the Bible and this is the inspired word of God, we must be careful to remember that that is a relatively new phenomenon. So when we talk about the Apostle Paul, when we talk about the Apostle Peter, when we talk about Malachi, when we talk about Isaiah, Jeremiah, none of those guys knew anything about a volume that has any number of books in there, whether 27 or 66 or any more than that. Never happened. So it begs the question how this volume that we now hold in our hands that contains 66 books came about. Whose idea was it? Jesus never had it. His disciples never had it, knew nothing about it. So it is somebody else's idea to put that volume together. It is also to be noted that there are significant disagreements about what was supposed to be included in the volume and what was supposed to be left out. Most of the people today who professes Christianity will side against Catholicism. And you check it out and you will see that most of the nominal Christian religions, they have taken a stand against Catholicism. But they need to ask themselves, what part did Catholicism plays in the 66 books we have today? Depending on where in the Western world one lives, most of those who use the 66 book volume of the Bible are not Anglicans. But you'll be surprised to know the significant role that the Anglicans play in the 66 book volume that we have here today. So it begs the question, if the Bible was written by inspired men, but the people who were instrumental in getting what we now call the Bible, that 66 book volume, are religions that most people today tend not to want to be part of because they don't see those religions as Christian religions. But how is it that you get the Bible from them and it's okay? How is it? You know? So these are matters that we need to seriously talk about. And I alluded in the past to the fact that there are so many things about the Bible that seems to be influenced by the same person we refer to as the arch enemy of God, that you seriously have to wonder what part of it can be trusted, what part of it are genuine, and what part of it are free of his influence. While most nominal Christians might use the King James Version or some version that is derived from it, the Catholics have their own version of the Bible called the Catholic Douay Version. And in the Catholic Douay Version, in the book of Exodus, chapter 6 and verse 3, which is the first place in the King James Bible where the name Jehovah appears, it is stated in the Catholic Douay Version in a footnote that the name Jehovah for God is a nickname because the name for God was written in ancient times by 4 Hebrew letters, YHWH, called the Tetragrammaton. And it says that some moderns, that's what the Catholic Douay Version says in Exodus 6:3 in a footnote, that some moderns have framed the name Jehovah. A name, it says, that by long disuse is now quite lost. And what that is saying is that YHWH, four consonants, whatever vowels were placed between those consonants to get a name, nobody living today knows that. So Jehovah is really not the divine name for God, as widely used as it might be. And I often ask, there are so many people who today claim to have special relationship with God, who claim to be filled with Holy Spirit, who claim to be hearing all kinds of things and messages from God. But yet none of them know what is a personal name of God. You know, it is written in the book of Isaiah, long before Jesus came on the earth, that those who call upon that name, that divine name, will be saved. But nobody today know what the name is. There are some persons who say it is Jesus, ignorantly refusing to remember that even the person we call Jesus is not Jesus, because the letter J never existed when he was alive. So how would he get in his name? You know? So something is seriously wrong with this volume that we have and that we have attributed to a God source, you know? So if the most sacred aspect of this book, the name of its author, is not known, is uncertain, what else is certain? What else is certain? You know, I refer to the beginning of this era. At the beginning of this era, the first century of this era, the first 33 years of this era, the man Jesus, as they say, became anointed, was baptized, and started a ministry. And he pursued his ministry for 42 months, was executed, leave the scene, and still none of the fellows that follow him knew what that name was. So it begged the question whether Jesus himself knew it. And if he did, why is it allowed to be lost? You know? Is it that it's not important? So there are so many unanswered questions. Then a very dominant player in this volume of 66 books that we have, because you know the 66 books are divided into two sections. Into the Old Testament, which is called the Hebrew Scriptures. A small part was written in the language Aramaic. And the last part called the New Testament, or the Christian Greek Scriptures. Now, the New Testament, or the Christian Greek Scriptures, it has 27 books making it up. That is from Matthew to Revelation. You'll find some 27 books. Some 14 of those 27 books are attributed to the writing of Paul, although there are some divisions and disagreements about that. Because while some persons accept that Paul is the writer of the book of Acts, there are some who said no. Some say Paul is the writer of the book of Hebrews. There are others who said those authors are unknown. So it might end up that Paul might very well write about 12 of the books of the New Testament. But have you ever heard that there is a very strong opinion out there that this fellow Saul of Tarsus, who became Paul, was like a wrench that is thrown into the mix by this arch enemy? If you don't know, that view is out there. That view is out there. That this fellow Paul came and turned the whole Christian movement on its head. And you wonder about it, because some of the most controversial things that are in this New Testament was written by Paul. You know, for example, we learn about the role of women and Paul's view of the role of women. You know, Paul assigned women to the most subservient role in the Christian faith. And today, one of the biggest cause for division in the Christian faith is what is the role of godly women? What's the role? There are still those who feels that the woman's role is one of subservience. For example, for many, many, many years, hundreds of years, the Catholics refused to have women priests. That might be changing. I might be considering a change to that. The same is true for hundreds of years too. The Anglican Church was divided on whether or not women should be accepted in the diocese. Well, that has changed in recent years. And many of the more fundamentalist, dogmatic Christian in the faith, like some of these Pentecostal type denominations, they're still hell bent on keeping women out of certain roles. You know, in the Adventist faith, it's something that have been debated for many, many decades, and changes are beginning to occur there. You know, so Paul's statement about women and their role in the church continue to be a very divisive, very, very divisive statement. And also, it was Paul in the New Testament who also restate something that was said in the Old Testament, that you do not accept accusation against a person unless you have 2 or 3 witnesses. Maybe when that was done, it may have been not a problem, but it turned out to be a major issue in today's world, where many acts of wrongdoing are taking place where nobody else can witness it. You know, child molestation, for example, is a prime example of that. You know, many times people break into people's house and there is no proof to who do it, even though you might be suspicious. But there is nothing in the divine book about fingerprinting. That never existed then. There's nothing in the divine book about DNA testing. In today's world, those things are the second and third witnesses that we need to many cases of wrongdoing. But that's not there in the book. So the next time you hold a volume of 66 books in your hand called the Bible, don't deceive yourself into thinking that it's all a very great book. It's a divisive book as well. It's a book that keeps the world permanently divided. It's a book, though it is dubbed the book to lead people to salvation, that makes people most uncertain as to the way to salvation. Lastly, the same Paul is one of those who throw the wrench also into the identity of the man Jesus against his Father, whether they are the same person or 2 different persons. And people are fighting over interpretation of what this article means, this definite article or indefinite article in Greek, what it means, and whether or not it means that they are one person or 2 different individuals. Those are simple matters that could have been explained. Paul, in his time, preached and wrote acceptably about enslavement. Slave, be obedient to your master. And don't talk back to them. Paul, even in his ministry, meet a fellow called Onesimus who ran away from his master because of mistreatment. And Paul converted him to Christianity and sent him right back into slavery. What an ideal opportunity he had as an inspired man, so called, to set the record straight that slavery was ungodly, it was wicked, it should never have happened. But he simply convert the gentleman and send him right back into slavery. So when I, as a descendant of enslaved Africans, think about that, what am I supposed to think? The Bible we now have is a product of our enslavement. That 66 book volume that we now hold in our hands came out of our enslavement experience. The people who perpetrated slavery on us are responsible for that volume. You know? So it is quite interesting. These matters are not things to just be left by the wayside. You know, as human beings trying to find our place in the world, we certainly need to think about these things. And don't fool ourselves into thinking that everything is all right. As long as you have a book, the Bible on the shelf, that all is well. It's not. There's a lot to be unearthed in there about our own past, you know. And so I hope this might spark some debate among persons who are thinking and get into it. Don't just simply accept something because it's a tradition from your childhood or from your parents' and grandparents' childhood. There's a lot of questions to be asked and a lot of questions to be answered. Until the next time, thank you so much for viewing. Thanks for subscribing. Thanks for liking these episodes. And as usual, continue to provide me your feedback. Until then, so long.